The Dalai Lama by Alexander Norman. Introduction. Waldorf Astoria Hotel, New York, August 1989. Striding up to reception, I announce my purpose. I'm looking for Mr. Tenzin Tithong, private secretary to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Under my arm, I am carrying the draft manuscript of the Dalai Lama's autobiography, Freedom in Exile, on which I have been working for the past several months. The receptionist stares at me blankly. Perhaps it is my strong English accent. Mr. De what? She demands in a slow drawl. 3 decades later, such a response is unimaginable. One of the world's most instantly recognizable people, the Dalai Lama sells out sports stadiums from Sydney to Sao Paulo, from Oslo to Johannesburg. With around 20 million Twitter followers, the Dalai Lama has more than the Pope, and his online presence continues to grow. He is a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, the Congressional Gold Medal, and the richest award of them all, the Templeton Prize for Spiritual Progress. He holds the freedom of cities and honorary degrees too numerous to count. His image adorns wristwatches and screensavers, while his Amazon page gives details of more than 200 books, crediting him as author. Sales of several individual titles run into the millions. Unquestionably, the Dalai Lama is one of the best known and best loved public figures of modern times. Yet for all his latter-day superstardom, few know much about the Dalai Lama or about the culture he embodies. And of what is known, a great deal is misunderstood. For example, many people suppose that the Dalai Lama is a religious leader, a sort of Buddhist pope. But unlike the Pope, who claims authority over every priest and prelate in Christendom, the Dalai Lama has no jurisdiction over any other Lama or monk. Neither is he the head of his own particular faith tradition, nor is he the leader of any of the subgroups within that tradition. In fact, he is not even abbot of the monastery of which he is a member. So when he says, as he often does, that he is, quote, just a simple Buddhist monk, end quote, the Dalai Lama is not just being characteristically modest. He is straightforwardly telling the truth. The Dalai Lamas, of which the present one is the 14th, have only ever been simple Buddhist monks, even through the great 5th Dalai Lama, who was one of the most powerful men in Asia. And even though the Dalai Lamas have always been venerated by people far beyond the land of snows, as Tibetans often refer to their country. From a political perspective, however, the Dalai Lamas have been anything but ordinary. Beginning with the Great Fifth, they have been, in theory at least, temporal leaders of a people whose country is the size of Western Europe, spanning over 1,500 miles from a border with Pakistan in the west to China in the east, and almost 1,000 miles from Mongolia in the north to India, Nepal, and Burma in the south. But it is little known that in 2011, the present Dalai Lama renounced his claim to lead his people as head of state in favor of democratically elected laymen. As a result, the office of Dalai Lama is now purely a teaching office. This makes perfect sense, however. The word Lama is the Tibetan translation of the Sanskrit word guru, a spiritual guide. Together with these misunderstandings, the Dalai Lama's image as smiling saint for all seasons fails to do justice either to the Dalai Lama as a person or the tradition he represents. It neglects his extraordinary achievements in settling a diaspora community now 250,000 strong. It neglects how he has unified a people previously sharply divided along geographical, tribal, and sectarian lines. It neglects how, in so doing, he has opened up the institution of the Dalai Lama to all Tibetans in a way that it never was before. It neglects his political reforms. It neglects his remarkable attainments as a scholar practitioner. He is unquestionably one of the most accomplished and learned masters of Vajrayana Buddhism to have emerged within the past century. It neglects the astonishing impact the Dalai Lama has had on the shape of the modern world. Above all, it neglects one of the most extraordinary cultures ever to have evolved on the face of the earth and the complex, often turbulent history that brought it into being. In writing this book, therefore, I have sought above all to set the Dalai Lama's deeds in the context of the history and culture of the Tibetan tradition, and it is for this reason that I have shown in some detail the circumstances of how the regency that governed Tibet until the Dalai Lama was of age both came into being and came to an end. Without some understanding of what and where the Dalai Lama comes from, we are likely both to miss the scale of his accomplishments and to misconstrue the enormity of the challenges he has faced. I hope particularly to show how the Dalai Lama's motivations have caused him to act in the way he has acted, these motivations being themselves determined by his understanding of the Tibetan tradition. I take as my starting point the fact that what has chiefly inspired him is the bodhisattva vow he took at the age of 15. Out of compassion, he committed himself to direct his every thought, word, and deed to the benefit of all sentient beings in their quest to overcome suffering. The Dalai Lama's life story can thus be understood as a teaching that shows, from the perspective of the tradition, what compassion really is and how this construal of compassion plays out in the everyday world. Here, though, I should say something about the words tradition and especially Tibetan tradition as I use them in this book. When I claim that the Dalai Lama exemplifies the Tibetan tradition, I take the terms to denote that which is handed down or handed over from one generation to another, not just the habitual practices of many Tibetans over time, but also the body of ideas and beliefs that attach to these practices. When, for example, I say that, according to Tibetan tradition, there are many hells, some hot, some frozen, I am saying that according to the understanding of most Orthodox believers within the tradition, this is the case. I don't mean to claim that all Tibetans everywhere have always believed this, only that most have and do. At the same time as making this point about tradition, I should also emphasize that, so far as the Tibetan religious tradition is concerned, there is Buddhism with, so to speak, local accents, but no such thing as a specifically Tibetan Buddhism. From the Tibetan points of view, the Buddhism preserved within this tradition is the highest, most complete form of Buddhism, even if some of its teachings and practices are regarded as heterodox by others. Because of my interest in studying the Dalai Lama in the context of Tibetan culture and history and presenting his biography as a lived lesson in what, from the perspective of his tradition, it is to be truly compassionate, I have been less interested in recounting what the Dalai Lama says. Both his spiritual teachings and his political views are recorded in the hundreds of books and many thousands of hours of video and voice recordings that have been made over the 60 years since he came into exile. It is to these sources that those interested in the Dalai Lama's spiritual and political philosophy should turn. As to what the Dalai Lama is actually like, I regard this question as secondary to the question of what the Dalai Lama means, not merely by what he says, but also by what he does. There's something to be said for personal detail, but in my opinion, that this tells us much less about the man than that, for example, his religious commitments included some that a number of authorities, even within his own Gelug school, considered to be dangerously mistaken. How the Dalai Lama interprets and shapes the Tibetan tradition, and especially where he departs from it, are, in my view, most telling, and from a historical perspective, even more significant than what his favorite television program is or what his hobbies are. For the record, his preferred viewing is nature programs. He is a fan of David Attenborough. While for hobbies, though he is less active than formerly, he has been an enthusiastic amateur horologist, and he continues to take a keen interest in the gardens surrounding his residence. It is arguably less of a failing that I am not a Buddhist. It has enabled me to ask questions and think thoughts that would otherwise have been more difficult, if not impossible. But for this same reason, I have no doubt that some of what I say here will seem to some impertinent and possibly even disrespectful, even though I mean neither impertinence nor disrespect. It is also possible that some of the material may be painful to some of my readers. With respect to this, I take encouragement from the Dalai Lama himself, who, on many occasions, has spoken on the need for fair and balanced assessment of the facts. I trust that I have succeeded. Certainly, this has been my aim at all times.